Good afternoon, half a day. The Committee on General Government Operations and Appropriation Housing is now called to order. For the record, today is Tuesday, June 7, and the time now is 2:04. Notice for this budget hearing were disseminated via email to all senators and all main media broadcasting outlets. First public notice was issued on May 26, followed by June 2nd. Committee will now hear Bill 276-36 CR, Committee on Rules by request of I Maga'hågan Guåhan, the Governor of Guam, in accordance with the Organic Act of Guam, an act to make appropriation for the operation of the executive branch of the Government of Guam for fiscal year ending September 30, 2023, making other appropriations and establishing miscellaneous and administrative provisions relative to the office of the Attorney General's office. I'd like to acknowledge my colleagues that have joined me this afternoon. We have the Oversight Chair, Speaker Therese Terlai. We have Senator Tony Ada and Senator Chris Duenas. Those testifying on Bill 276-36 CR relative to the Office of Attorney General's office are invited to the panel. We have the Attorney General, Mr. Levin Camacho. When we start out, I'd ask you to please introduce your staff, and then the staff, when answering a question the first time, identify yourself, then that'll be the only time you'd have to repeat yourself, okay? Or identify yourself. Rules of this budget hearing shall be as follows. Written testimony shall be submitted to the committee. Please provide my legislative staff with your written testimony for photocopying. Testimony may be read. A lengthy testimony should be summarized to about 5 minutes, but Attorney General, I know you have more than 5 minutes. You'll have all afternoon, okay, to present your budget, if needed. Those testifying will be allowed to present oral testimony. Once you're done, please remain in the room for questions or for additional testimony as may be desired by members of the committee. Questions and testimony shall be confined to the substance or nature of the agenda. We'll be discussing only the budget of the Attorney General's office. Personal inference as to the character or motive of any senator or any individual testifying is not permitted. Any violation of this general rule of conduct will result in removal from the budget hearing. Proper form and decorum shall be practiced by all present in the public hearing room for these proceedings. Individuals who fail to maintain proper form and decorum will be restricted from providing oral testimony and will be escorted from the room. When you speak, please make sure that the microphone is on and that you speak into the microphone. Other questions may be submitted to the committee for submission to the agency or department for responses. Please state your name and your title for the record. At this time, I'd ask the panel to please rise as the Sergeant at Arms will swear you in for your testimony.
Please raise your right hand. Under penalty of perjury, do you all affirm that any and all information you provide today, whether it be verbally, electronically, and in writing, be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Okay. So, Chair, you may proceed. You're under oath.
Thank you, Sergeant at Arms. We'll now begin to discuss the budget of the Attorney General's office. Mr. Camacho, Attorney General, please.
I can figure that out. Thank you. With me today is our Chief Deputy, Shannon Taitano, General Counsel, Stephanie Mendiola, and Andrew Perez, who's our Deputy Attorney General for the Child Support Enforcement Division. And our General Counsel, Stephanie Mendiola, will be giving our opening statement.
Sizos Masi AG, Buenas, Senadots and Augustins, and Otru Senadotsia. Malaga. Asa. It's not always a pleasure being in the hot seat, but always a pleasure to be back at the branch that's near and dear to my heart. Sizos Maasi for this opportunity to present our budget request for fiscal year 2023, which remains a conservative proposal to meet our operational needs during these continually uncertain times. As we continue to rebuild and adapt through the ongoing pandemic, our office remains committed to fulfilling essential functions such as prosecuting crimes, representing our government in court, assisting with collections, and advising agencies. We also continue to provide essential services to our people, including child support, enforcement, victim support, juvenile and family support, and consumer protection services. The pandemic amplified the need for many of these services, and since 2020, Team OAG has risen to meet the demand. Although we're better prepared now than we were at the start of the pandemic, our office continues to see a heavy pandemic-related workload in areas such as procurement, contract review, and prosecution. Building on our historic efforts from prior years, we've continued to hit new milestones in multiple areas of operation. Our Consumer Protection Division secured millions of dollars for our island to better measure the impact of the opioid epidemic in Guam and to combat co-occurring disorders, including tackling the methamphetamine crisis troubling our community. And we're grateful to the legislature for the passage of the Opioid Prevention and Treatment Act, which maximized the amount of Guam's recovery. And we're happy to report that we've held the first advisory council meeting. We also continue to assist the Department of Revenue and Taxation, Guam Memorial Hospital, and other Government of Guam agencies with collections. Since making collections a priority in 2019, we've helped collect $2.8 million in cash and new payment agreements in cases that were approaching the statute of limitations. This represents a 9.5 to 1 return on investment from the funds appropriated by the legislature in fiscal year 19 to assist DRT with collections. The impact of this partnership was highlighted by the landmark $1.5 million payment secured from the sale of the Verona Resort and Spa earlier this year. After over a decade, our office closed the procurement on upgrading APPROPRIATIONS, the case management system for our Child Support Enforcement Division, and we're finally beginning the transition. The support of the legislature in dedicating our FY19 lapses to this effort was instrumental in our success. To maximize the impact of our locally funded standard operations, our office also consistently seeks federal grant opportunities. With funding from the Department of Interior's Technical Assistance Program, we've been able to launch our digital archiving project with the goal of digitizing all of the office's hard copy archives, converting records to searchable format, and standing up a digital document management system for the long term. We also recently received funding to stand up a modern interview room to serve multiple functions, including victim and witness interviews for prosecution investigations. We've also taken on new efforts to improve how we serve the island. Our office has worked with the Guam Police Department to establish an independent investigative team when the use of deadly force by law enforcement officers results in death or serious physical injury. All of our local law enforcement partners have signed on to this initiative. We've sent a team of GPD officers and one of our OAG investigators to train on new de-escalation techniques to be used when dealing with people who suffer from mental health issues or are in a moment of crisis. The first Guam training on these techniques was conducted in March for a new cycle of law enforcement cadets. Also in March, we announced a new program launched in partnership with GPD and victim service providers to identify high-risk victims of family violence and sexual assault and immediately connect them with support services. Lastly, but certainly not least, we continue to expand on our efforts to protect Guam's natural and cultural resources. As we start the discovery phase of our case to hold the Navy accountable for paying its fair share of cleaning the Ordot landfill, we launched outreach efforts to collect stories from Guam residents to help strengthen our case. We've settled our historic lawsuit against the owner and construction company of the Mangilao solar power plant project for damaging resources in Sasadzan Valley. And finally, we are trying to build capacity to pursue these types of cases across the government. We hosted a series of 5 training sessions in partnership with the Conference of Western Attorneys General and led by presenters from California, Colorado, Idaho, and Washington on a variety of topics related to environmental regulation and enforcement. We thank you for your continued support of our office and hope you will look favorably upon our request. And to discuss our request in further detail, I'll turn it over to AG Camacho, who will give our presentation. Cesar Smasi.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So just to give a very quick overview, and Mr. Chair, we're trying to keep this within 5 to 10 minutes if we can. We'll move quickly. We're going to start with some highlights, talk about our request, and we have made some significant revisions based on our meeting and our discussions with your office, so thank you for that. Next slide, please. So just to give an idea of the operations of our office, and I think most people in the community interact with our office when it comes to prosecution, when it comes to child support. We've brought our Deputy AG on child support enforcement to talk about some of the initiatives that we have. But this is just in FY22 some of the efforts that we've made. And to highlight them, we have $8.4 million in child support and arrears that were dispersed in FY21. To date, $4.9 million have been dispersed. There are over 4,000 open cases right now that our office is handling. Our general counsel talked about the lethality assessment program. So I'm not going to touch on every one of these things, but you can review it on your own just to see the productivity of our office and our team or to date through June of this year. Next slide, please. So one of the highlights we want to talk about is the return on investment in our office. And you can see there 2016, 2017, 2018, FY 2019 is when we received a $300,000 appropriation to assist the Department of Revenue and Taxation and Collections. That same year, our mission was expanded to also assist other government agencies, including the Department of Administration, Guam Memorial Hospital. And you'll see the result of those efforts have been quite substantial, really culminating in this year where we have already collected on behalf of the government or secured awards of $2.6 million. That includes the $1.5 million from the sale of the Verona Hotel through bankruptcy proceedings. We have 2 other bankruptcy proceedings, and to give some perspective, Mr. Chair, you're familiar with Fred Nishihira, our chief of staff, who regrets he can't be here, but we've never handled bankruptcy cases before. So this is a new capacity that we're building out. Our chief of staff has been handling that. I believe we have 3 or 4 that we're actively involved in. We have the opioid litigation. We've received confirmation that we should be receiving about $450,000 deposited into our account within the next few weeks. We anticipate another approximately $1 million in opioid settlement funds to be received in July for a total of approximately 1.4 to 1.5 million in opioid settlements. And again, thank the legislature for establishing the trust fund, and we can use the advisory council to make sure that money is spent addressing substance abuse, mental health issues, and co-occurring disorders. Next slide, please. So our appropriation total for FY22 was $14.8 million, and you'll see there. The bulk of it, 86%, over 86%, is just for our salaries and benefits. Our rent is $1.2 million, and our contractual of the amount that we were authorized, $704,000, $5,000 for supplies. Next slide, please. Now, one of the things that we discussed at this time last year was whether or not we needed to have a carryover appropriation to meet our operational needs. And what we've provided here is that our FY22 authorization of 14.8 was $630,000 short of what we would need, what we project we will need to finish this fiscal year. So we are expected to lapse approximately $114,000 in salaries and benefits, but you'll see in particular with the contractual needs of our office that we have had to rely on our prior year obligations, and 14.8 would not have been enough. We would have had to come back in. For our contractual needs, and this will get a little bit into our FY23 request, the biggest pieces of that have been we have needed to go out to procure a new case management system for our prosecution division and other divisions, which would also include a migration from our prior system to a new system potentially, as well as we've had to negotiate our legal research, online research services, and that is also another procurement that we have ongoing. So again, we anticipate that this fiscal year, we are projecting about $15.5 million that we will actually expend, again, relying on prior year obligations, prior year lapses. Next slide, please. So instead of doing, and I know that in our analysis, there was a delta between our FY22 authorized and our FY23 request, we believed it would be more accurate to actually look at how much we anticipate spending, including our prior year lapses. So you'll see the largest increase between our FY22 projected and our FY23 request is a $1.8 million in salaries and benefits, and we have a slide getting into a little bit more detail on that. For contractual, there's an increase of approximately $300,000. Another major procurement that we are in the process of starting is for our rent, our office space. We anticipate that IFB to go out tomorrow, actually. So we have included in our contractual the potential cost of moving and other associated costs with potentially having to find a new home for our office. The capital outlay, we've reduced to zero. Again, we are going out to bid for our office space, but this year those were primarily IT upgrades and infrastructure within our office. Next slide, please. So for the 1.8 million increase, and what it appears to be an increase in our budget from FY22 and FY23, we have investigators in our office who were impacted by the law enforcement pay increase, and we supported that, but that also resulted, we were able to prorate this year, but next year the full impact is approximately $268,000 to our budget. Increments for our staff is projected to be about $480,000. So, ballpark of the 1.8 million, about 800,000 of that could potentially be attributed to the law enforcement pay increase as well as increments. The vacancies we've asked for, and again, Mr. Chair, thank you for speaking with us. We've dialed back on our vacancies, and one of the things that you've asked us to show which ones we're actively recruiting. So next slide, please. We whittled it down, and we wanted to prepare, oh, well, before I proceed to this, we have not received any federal funding, no ARPA funds. So all of this is using our general funds to pay for all of our operations. We haven't received anything from the pandemic funds. For our vacancies, attorney vacancies in our prosecution division, we've had 5 departures in the last fiscal year. 2 have transferred to other governmental agencies. 3 have relocated. Since then, we have hired 2 additional attorneys. We also have 4 attorneys from other divisions who are assisting in prosecution while we actively recruit. We have asked to hold funding for 3 vacancies within our prosecution division, which we also have 2 attorneys who are on military leave, extended military leave. That would get our prosecutors to about 18 to 19, I believe, based on our current staffing pattern. We have 1 attorney from consumer that left our office. We have funded that vacancy. And our child support enforcement division relies on a retired attorney. And one of the requests, or one of the conditions is that we did not use that to supplant a classified position. So we are holding that vacancy open in the event we have someone who is interested in working in our child support enforcement division. Under our staff vacancies under active recruitment, and I'll provide the list there, I did want to note that all of these vacancies were created this fiscal year, and were filled at the start of this fiscal year, so it's not as though it was a vacancy on paper that we are electing to recruit right now. These are all positions that were created, or vacancies that occurred during this fiscal year. One of the impacts that we had, we'd initially intended to add 2 additional investigators because of the IIT and other demands of our investigator division, but the exchange that we had to make was based on the salary increase. We are no longer able to add those positions, so you'll see there that we are filling 1 investigator, 1 position, but that again is to replace a retirement that we had recently within the office. Next slide, please. And we've gone through everything, Mr. Chair, so I don't think I was much longer than 5 minutes, but hopefully we've answered all of your questions and we're available to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you. Attorney General Camacho, you identified, you got the vacancies that they were filled in this fiscal year and that became vacant. You're just about ready to fill them, right?
That's correct. So all of the positions that we've identified there, I believe we indicate the personnel specialists, we've already offered the start dates in 2 weeks.
Okay. No problem.
So
I just wanted to confirm that.
Yes, sir.
And that in the next fiscal year, it'll be filled. So we're not looking at any vacancies.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I'll ask your oversight chair to ask the questions of the panel. Madam Speaker Therese.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for being here today. Yeah, let's just begin on that last slide then on your vacancies. You said that all of the vacancies in this slide are vacancies that occurred during the current fiscal year. So you're just filling up to your current staffing authorization.
That's correct.
All right, so for example, under prosecution, you're going to fill 3 vacancies, but you said you had 5 departures.
5 departures. We've since hired 2 attorneys, which is how we got to the 3 vacancies.
Okay, so there are only 3 vacancies left in the prosecution division?
When we met with Office of Finance and Budget, They recommended that we be realistic in terms of the number of attorneys that we could recruit in a fiscal year. So 3 to 4 is probably the most that we've recruited in a single fiscal year. We do have 2 attorneys within prosecution who have been on long-term military leave, but of course when we submit our budget request, we anticipate they have leave through the end of this fiscal year, but we are anticipating them coming back and funding them through next year as well. So 3 vacancies and then 2 on active military leave within prosecution division.
All right. When I looked at the FY22 budget, or even the current one, so it says that there are, I thought it showed there were 17 vacancies in prosecution division. I don't know how many of those were for attorneys versus other positions, but how many vacancies that you're not requesting funding for in the prosecution division for attorneys, just attorneys?
So the staffing side, that is where the bulk of those vacancies exist. I want to say, have filled within this fiscal year 12 positions within prosecution, but those familiar with government employment know oftentimes it's going to be a promotion within the government. So although there was a position filled, as an example, we hired a paralegal 2. We had an open announcement, we interviewed a paralegal from our office, received and filled that position to paralegal 2. We hired 3 paralegal 1s. We had open competition, open announcement. We had promotions within our legal secretaries who moved into those positions. So what ends up happening is it's a ladder where you start at paralegal 2, paralegal 1, legal secretary, and the only real opportunity to add new bodies is at the entry-level positions of clerks.
Say the last part?
The clerks is really the only place, because usually within an office, when it comes to the rating, and again, only the top 5 rated employees are interviewed for an opening.
All right.
So if you have someone who's been with our office, they typically will score, or within the government, they will score higher.
So with this recruitment of the 3 vacancies, current vacancies, will bring your prosecutors number up to, is that how many?
I believe 18 or 19.
All right. But there are, you're saying approximately 17 vacant prosecutor positions?
No. There are only 3 vacancies for prosecutors. The other vacancies would be in the staffing side.
All right.
So I believe we have vacancies in
So
our
you
legal
filled all the
secretary.
prosecutor positions. If you fill these 3, you've filled all of the prosecutor positions available?
It's the 3, and then we have the 2 on extended military leave that are also within the division.
All right. And,
Sorry?
oh,
And then
so there
we are.
are no other prosecutor positions in your office? I mean, the maximum that you're saying you can hire would be 18. That's how many positions that you have filled or unfilled or funded or unfunded?
So when we put our request in, and it's going to depend on the levels that we get. So it's going to depend on our budget and the attorney applicants that we receive. Some of the vacancies that we've shown are attorneys 2 and attorneys 3. Usually when we recruit attorneys, they are coming in at an attorney 1 level. So 3 attorney 2s, the funding would potentially be the equivalent of 4 or 5 attorney 1s. But when we met with the chair, he asked us again to be, not to show the wish list. If we were to talk to our chief prosecutor, he would say, I need 25 prosecutors. But the idea of us hiring 7 new attorneys next fiscal year is not very high.
Okay. Well, yeah, I know. So I understand his concern, but that's my concern. I want to know I remember having these discussions with the chief prosecutor, O'Malley, several years ago, and they would always tell us there's a number of prosecutors that we need. We should have this many. And if, so I'm just trying to find out how many positions are actually authorized versus funded.
So some of the changes that we've made as well, and we're looking at just being more efficient in the way we use our staff. As an example, we have 7 or 8 paralegals. They are qualified to do motions practice, to draft oppositions, to draft motions. That is not a practice that has been followed within our office. So we are moving in a direction where our paralegals will perform more paralegal functions. We also learned recently that our attorneys were doing data entry after they returned from court. So even if you're spending 30 minutes to an hour entering your notes, that is a task that can be performed by other support staff. So that's a change that our chief prosecutor is making. The other significant change that's made at the court is last year, they have tried to consolidate the criminal calendar to 4 courtrooms. Prior to that, in 2019 and all years before, all 7 judges were courts of general jurisdiction and had a criminal calendar. So they have since consolidated to 4. Some of our civil judges have held on to existing or pre-existing criminal cases, but the intention is for them not to get assigned any more cases. So they are consolidating the criminal calendar into 4. There's mental health court, and again, there's magistrate, but you're no longer having to cover 7 plus magistrate plus all the other hearings.
So you're saying the 18 attorneys, I still don't have the number of how many positions are actually authorized in the prosecutor's office? I mean, prosecutors I'm talking about?
We don't have a maximum
There's
speaker.
none?
So if we got the funding and we were to
I
get
see.
5
Okay.
applicants for attorney 1
All
and we
right.
had the funding for it,
So the 18 that you want to fill, 18 total, right, would be
it's 19.
19, okay, so 19 total, you're saying are enough to handle the current load at the current court system the way it's operating. Have you factored in, the governor made a request for an additional judge to be funded? If they add in an additional judge, does that impact that?
It would really depend again on whether or not they carry a criminal load or don't. So I believe that those assignments went into effect. I want to say it's 3 years that they have them on the rotation.
All right, so if we're just funding the current levels of prosecutors, does that then say for the next fiscal year, the prosecutors are going to be operating at the same level, I guess, the same caseloads?
One thing that other offices have done and have paid for is actually doing an analysis of courtroom calendar and caseload. And the way that you do it is not by the number, it's not a numerical value. You would go based on the time you spend. So as an example, most of the cases that we go to trial in are going to be homicides and criminal sexual conduct cases. The 3 largest cases that we charge out every year, I want to say 70 to 80% of the cases we charge out every year are either possession of a Schedule II, controlled substance, family violence, and DWI. So the bulk of the 1,300 cases that we file every year have specialty courtrooms. So as an example, DWI, I can find the stats, of the 1,300, 300 to 400 would be DWI in a year. Everything is set by the court already. The plea agreements are drafted, first offender guidelines are already established. Family violence has specialty court as well. So if you are a first offender family violence or you qualify, you are entitled to family violence court, which again has its own process. There's an assessment. If you are eligible, there's an offer that gets made. Adult drug court is the same, where if you are eligible, there's a standard plea agreement. So that's where we're talking about being more efficient in the way that we handle our processes for the higher volume cases. 300 cases potentially could be handled by a single attorney, 1 or 2 attorneys and a paralegal as an example, which is not something that we've traditionally done. But just based on the amount of work, you're not going to go to trial in very many DWI first offender cases or family violence cases where they qualify for a deferred plea.
So you're saying by making that adjustment within your office, you're able to free up the prosecutors who are going to be handling the criminal sexual conduct cases and the assaults and homicides?
That's correct. We are going to prioritize violent crime.
You're going to what?
Prioritize the prosecution of violent crimes and criminal
Okay.
sexual conduct.
How many attorneys are there in the child support division?
6 total? 7 total.
Okay. So would you say that there are, what about the civil litigation?
Civil litigation, 7 or 8?
And the solicitors, if you've
I want
got,
to say it's like 7 or 8 attorneys
Okay.
within civil litigation.
and the solicitors are for the agencies?
That's correct.
Yeah, how many do you have?
I think 3 out. I think 11 or 12.
Okay. And so if you can just explain, I'm trying to figure out, I looked at the staffing patterns, so they're divided. The staffing patterns are divided by divisions, for example. And for example, the civil litigation division was put near the names. They are Assistant Attorney General. I can tell they're attorneys by the indications here. But then they give these, on the Solicitors Division, there's these indications that these are direct cost highway, DPW, or DLM, local funds, or Department of Corrections, or tri-party. Are these asterisks with those indications, meaning we're not funding those with this budget request?
No, we are still funding. So we have 13 attorneys within our solicitor division. We are required to pay all 13 attorneys. And we explained one of the importances of the carryover. Guam EPA is a very good example where they have an in-house attorney, Assistant Attorney General, who has a salary of about $148,000. It was not uncommon for us not to receive any funds from Guam EPA until the last quarter of the fiscal year.
Okay, so we're locally funding all positions.
That's correct.
Right? But you're also using MOUs to get reimbursement, for example, like you use EPA,
That's correct.
for the same amounts
That's
that we are
correct.
funding.
Well, it depends. Guam EPA does fully fund their Assistant Attorney General, Tom Keeler, who is assigned to DPW. He invoices. So if he invoices their office less than his salaries and benefits, then that is out of our local funds.
That's out of, what do you
We
mean?
pay the salary, we submit an invoice to be reimbursed, but if the reimbursement request is less than what we paid him, then that's all coming out of our budget.
Okay. All right, what I'm trying to find out is if we are paying all these salaries pursuant to these staffing patterns that, we're appropriating for, yeah, and then you get reimbursed with the MOU, that's extra, right? Except for maybe the DPW case where you say they have to invoice and get reimbursed.
Well, not all the agencies, so we have now started putting the funds into our operations account. I believe we had billed and invoiced, a concrete example, I believe $750,000 in FY21 for MOU and federal grants. We had about $100,000 in our operations paid through MOU funding for that year. So it's not as though if we invoice $750,000, we receive and have $750,000 on hand. What we
right.
end up doing with that funding is, as an example for Guam EPA, we will charge that attorney against that account with the idea that it will be replenished.
All right, but we've already appropriated that amount. So what my concern is, we have some small agencies who are getting billed to, from the Attorney General's office, and I feel like we've already funded all of the positions in the Attorney General's office, right, through these budgets, except for those you don't request. And so if we funded all of them, can't these agencies rely on the Attorney General's office to represent them without getting additional billings? And I'm talking, for example, we took care of the Chamorro Land Trust because that was happening to them. Ancestral Lands, DLM, still being charged by the Attorney General's office for legal services, but they're a line agency of the government, and we're funding all the attorneys.
What would happen, Speaker, they don't have to pay, but they get a dedicated attorney. So they pay to have someone on hand 24/7. If they were to be paid, I don't think we would have a problem if all the line agencies' attorneys were to come back to our office, because some agencies have to wait for a while before they don't have a dedicated attorney. So when they have a request, it goes into our general pool, is assigned. That's the benefit of them entering into an MOU, is that they have an in-house and dedicated attorney where they don't have to submit a formal request to our deputy AG to assist them. So that's what, and most of them are willing to pay to have, I want to say exclusivity, but a dedicated attorney to assist them with all their matters.
Yeah, that's true. They've told me that if they've been told that if they don't pay these lawyers, that they will not get prompt service.
It's not about prompt, they'll just be handled in the same way that we handle every other agency.
Does this budget account for settlement money that your office has received and any cost that that might be dedicated to your office through those settlements?
So the opioid settlements are by statute going to be deposited into the trust account for the Opioid Advisory Council. The cases that we have brought suit under the deceptive trade practices are deposited into our consumer protection account, which is then used to fund other consumer protection investigations. So as an example, we have costs associated with the investigations into social media companies.
Right.
So that's what those money is used for.
Do we see an accounting of those, all of those types of funds? Because those are not appropriated here today or through this budget. Yeah, those are the separate accounts. I think in the last budget, there was a provision that said we were authorizing you to use any accounts that you have for operations if necessary. Yeah, is there a way to see the accounting of those other funds?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can do that.
All right.
Most of the all of the consumer protection funds have been spent for consumer-related matters. So all the investigations that we are part of, that's what those funds are being used for. The initial opioid settlement under McKinsey was $200,000, and we can provide you with those agreements. They are used to fund, I believe, to support RSAT and OASIS. They also have been used for well, we haven't finished some of the procurement.
Well, those are settlement funds, but I'm talking about the costs that go to your office.
Okay.
Because those are operations, they've turned into somehow operations, right, for your office, or they go into, they're authorized to be used for operations. And I just want to get a handle on that together with the appropriations chair of, you know, if we're fully funding the AG's office, yet they bring in their own funds, yeah, are we doubly funding that?
We haven't asked for any funding for our consumer investigations. So I mean, again,
So we are not funding consumer investigations, you're saying?
the general fund is not funding any of our consumer investigations.
Is that the same as consumer protection?
So when we have, I approved part of our agreement in a multi-state litigation with Google, as an example, cost sharing. So we just authorized $18,000 to be paid for that, to be part of that investigation. We also have document management software that when we have large cases, we pay an amount for data that is also paid out of our consumer protection fund. So
But
we
we're
don't
also
ask-
funding a consumer protection division, right?
Correct, but the investigative costs that our consumer protection division is engaged in aren't part of the budget request. So these costs, and we can provide an accounting of what we're paying, but all of it is related to investigations that we're engaged
Yeah, so I just want to get a handle on how much,
Sure.
in addition, in special funds that are coming in, other revenues that we are not controlling here. Yeah.
I can represent that we don't request for general fund appropriation for services and investigations and then fund it out of our consumer protection fund, if that's what the concern is.
Right. I just want to know, so we're funding the lawyers, we're funding the staff, and you're saying you're funding something else, an investigation out of it, and so I just want to know how much, it looks to us like we're fully funding these divisions, but you're saying the revenues that are being received by Attorney General's office, in addition to what, you know, we are funding, are being used for some other purposes. Yeah, so I'd just like to see that.
Another example would be for our opioid litigation, we had to hire an expert. That was not part of our civil litigation. We didn't request for an expert witness, so that was
Sure.
funded out of our consumer protection.
Yeah, but prior to the opioid settlement, all of those things were funded out of the same?
Actually,
process?
we funded that prior to any opioid settlements being received. So that was
Right?
funded.
It was funded by what we're looking at.
That was funded by a Honda settlement that we received the year before.
Well, then prior to that, right? Prior to, that's what I'm asking. It's like there's a special fund, and I just want to see an accounting of it, because we don't get reports on any of those special funds. I haven't seen any, so I'd just like to see, yeah,
Speaker,
what's being received and what they're being used for.
Madam Speaker, if I just may add to clarify, definitely we could provide the counting of our special funds, but I just wanted to clarify a point about giving the money that you're appropriating being extra. And we talked about this with OFB, the amount that goes to attorneys. It's not necessarily extra, it's more the concept of fronting. So for example, between our fiscal year budgets, on the chart in the PowerPoint, you'll see negative $630,000, and that's what we were able to use from prior years. There's also projects that get put on hold in the beginning of a fiscal year because we have to pay the salaries for our attorneys until we collect on MOUs from our partner agencies. And then when that money comes in, then we can reallocate and use that money for projects that we
For
may
some
have
other
put on hold.
projects that are not listed here, but what's listed here are the salaries, and we're fully funding them. That's what I'm saying. So if you want to use that money for something else, you've been able to, but that's because we are fronting the full salaries. And so when you bring in the $400,000 that we just paid for salaries, and you bring that in again, you're able to use it however you want, right?
No, the projects will be included, but we've communicated with the legislature that we use the lapses to, because we receive the money at the end of the fiscal year.
Right.
To
And
use
that
for
was for different
operations.
projects. That's what I'm saying. Those were for the new child support system, right? And different
No,
things that money comes in and then it's used for purposes that we're not necessarily.
No, it's more like this,
Funding.
Speaker. If the legislature fully funded us and gave us 16 million, we'd be okay. And then I see what your point is, we're fully funding attorneys. But if the legislature gives us 14 million, then we have to use the difference in funding. We have to rely on the difference in funding.
If you use your lapses to pay for other things, right?
Yes, because
I mean, it's all a matter of what you're using your money on, and that's why I want to see the accounting, because the money is being used for other things that we're not discussing here. We're discussing the salaries of every attorney general in the office. There's none there that's not being funded here. Is that correct, Attorney General?
there's not.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
We are, these staffing patterns and the funding, all of these, I mean, that's what we're talking about today, right? All of the attorneys in your office that are being funded this way.
I guess the main point I would make, Speaker, is we can't assume that we're going to get paid by anyone. So if
Right, so we are funding it. We, the legislature, the government of Guam, the people of Guam are funding all of the positions in your office, right? And
Yes.
we've allowed you by MOU to go out and get reimbursement if you can, but sometimes we're getting reimbursement from the same people who we are trying to fund. For example, land management. We have to give them extra money to pay the Attorney General's office for legal services when we have funded all the attorneys in the Attorney General's office. That's the point.
Okay.
But we can get back to that. If you could just talk about, one more time, if you fill the 18 positions in the prosecutor's office, you're satisfied, and you're saying you're about to fill the 3 because you're at interview stages, the interviews are completed. So you will have no vacancies for FY23 in the prosecutor's office.
No, we anticipate we'll have vacancies. Again, that was done, we were asked to provide a realistic number of attorneys that we could actively recruit. We have hired 2 attorneys under the retired attorney provision, and the condition is that those would not replace a classified employee. So if we had 5 classified attorneys apply, we would offer those 5 classified attorneys to fill, and then we would eliminate the retired attorneys.
All right, so you're saying now that you will have vacancies in the prosecutor's office?
If we hired under our current staffing pattern, if we keep all of them, but the 3 vacancies, I want to go back. We have 2 that are on extended military leave, and we have 2 who are retired attorneys who are working within prosecution now. We have made some offers that have gone out. I don't know if it's going to get us to 3, but we are still going to actively recruit prosecutors. And the issue that we have, under a temporary admission, you get 5 years to practice in Guam without taking the Guam bar. And that's the problem that we had this year. You have people coming up on year 3 and year 4 and have 1 year left to practice in Guam, and they're not going to wait until the last day of their 5 years before they try to seek outside employment. We have over half of our attorneys now are licensed in Guam, but we still have a handful that are on temporary admissions. So we would always want to have ongoing recruiting because you don't know when someone who's here on a temporary admission is going to potentially leave. But in our budget requests, we did ask to fill all of our current positions fully funded, plus 3 more vacancies to get us to a full slate of a minimum 18 attorneys. If we were to get, as an example, 5 attorneys for attorney 1, we would be able to fund that under these current levels and then replace them with the 3 attorney 2s as an example.
Okay, so we're going to fund up to the 18 in the levels that you have them currently. But if you get a vacancy in a higher level, you might be able to get 2 attorney 1s, for example.
That's
what
correct.
you're saying. That's how we might end up with more than 18 prosecutors.
That's correct.
But otherwise, the plan is 18.
We showed the vacancies that were created this year, we kept them in, and what we're actively recruiting and hoping to fill.
All right. I'm just trying to think how to word this, but can you just describe for the staffing pattern of, for example, the child support attorneys? A lot of them are higher levels attorneys. The pay is high, and so I know that the child support division has a large amount of it is federally funded. So we're getting these higher level attorneys for, the local part that we pay is a small portion, I guess. But is there a need for that many attorneys in the child support versus in the prosecution?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we have 7 attorneys in child support that we've asked for funding. So we've asked for funding for 18 in prosecution. The way that our system is set up, and again, we have 4,000 open cases currently that are in enforcement stage that are divided across 6 courtroom attorneys.
There's only one courtroom.
There's a referee, but if you talk to the caseload, I believe 400 to 500 cases per attorney within the Child Support Enforcement Division that are active at any given time. So if you were to start reducing the number of child support attorneys, I think that the impact on services and our ability to go in and appear before the referee. Now, there are other jurisdictions, if the legislature were to want to change the law and to, as an example, in Hawaii, their director is able to enter orders for child support. So they have fewer attorneys than we do for the entire island of Oahu, but that's because they don't have to go to a referee. It's not adversarial. They collect the wage information, and then the Title IV director enters into a support order, and then there's still an appeal process, but that eliminates the need for as many attorneys. Our cases, everything has to go before the court for an enforcement order. They require, as a matter of practice, even for stipulations typically, for there to be a hearing held to allow for both parties to appear and for explanations to be given.
All right. Well, if you recommend that, then yeah, let us know. Is there a way to,
And one last thing. Since I've come on board, most of the senior attorneys within Child Support Enforcement Division were there when I came on board.
yes,
We have hired one new attorney who is, I believe, a 2-1, but it's not easy to recruit attorneys out of law school to our Child Support Enforcement Division.
oh, that's interesting. So it's hard to recruit the new attorneys to child support, and it's hard to recruit the experienced attorneys to prosecution,
That's
I
correct,
think.
because
Yeah.
they want courtroom experience and they want to be
Yeah.
involved in either litigation or prosecution. Most attorneys who are coming right out of law school don't want to do administrative law as a first preference. So that is the challenge that we've had for recruiting. We've actually offered younger attorneys positions within Child Support Enforcement Division. Some of the, and I mean, I can get into the issues about, some of
So-
it's just CWA, but
So you've explained to us that the 18 prosecutors, may be enough because of some of the efficiencies that you've achieved in how the work is done and how the court is set up, but I don't know. It just sounds like whenever, I don't know. It sounds to us like if we want to combat crime more, that we would focus on recruiting more prosecutors? Or is there do you think there's not an issue in recruiting prosecutors, or that we need to recruit more, that we need to find ways to incentivize them, especially the experienced trial attorneys, to go towards, to serve in the prosecution's division?
I definitely would support, we're hoping that the attorney pay gets looked at, because some of the people who've left our office recently to relocate are being offered $30,000 more for the same level of experience back in New Mexico, as an example, or in Connecticut. So there is some pay disparities. We received a pay study that was done by another AG's office that we can provide, just to get it more commensurate with national levels of salaries. But the violent crimes, and that's what I'm saying, we have to prioritize the prosecution of violent crimes. The legislature has laws in place, and this is where I think people don't understand. DWI, family violence, and possession, drug possession, they all have specific statutes that provide for rehabilitation. We have mental health treatment court, we have veterans treatment court. The court is a firm believer in treatment and rehabilitation. So all of those cases are lumped in, and if we look at the criminal sexual conduct cases, over the number of cases that we charge out in a year, it's not like 30% of the cases we charge out are criminal sexual conduct. Again, those three categories account for 60 to 70, maybe more, of the total number of cases that we file per year. I know a big issue has come up with the release statute, that people believe that the judges are just releasing defendants out. That's by statute. We have a bail statute that sets forth the criteria for the court to consider. So there are many times where our office will go in and oppose release, but based on the statute currently on the books, the magistrate judge will order release or electronic monitoring. So if that's a concern, that's another area where the legislature has authority to revise our bail statute and to potentially provide more funding for electronic monitoring. There are all kinds of other things. So, again, it's just the idea that we release people. We don't release defendants. That is a judicial function, and they are governed by a statute that this body has authority over. So if you believe that there are too many people being released, you have the ability to go in and to revise that statute and to change the criteria that are being considered.
All right. Well, I was thinking, and we had discussed before, and even with prior attorney generals, about incentivizing the pay for prosecutors, and I think we even discussed this at the budget meeting we had prior to this hearing. Incentivizing the pay for prosecutors so you could recruit the experienced litigators, recruit and train, new ones, but also to keep them, right? And because, when I look at the salaries, they're the same, but I can't imagine that the work is the same, and that the toll that it would take on prosecutors, versus some of the other work that's done. representing agencies is very important, but I can't imagine that it takes the same toll as prosecuting. And so I looked around for different ways that have been incentivized, and we discussed, hazardous pay. We discussed just a different description of this type of pay. We discussed reclassifying prosecutors versus the other attorneys in the office, and that DOA is doing a new classification study, right, for, it sounds like, across the board of the government. And so I'm hoping that your office is going to work with them to, if the if the positions are different, as I think they are, if you agree, that we are going to see that in the new classification study or pay study that they do, and that would help to classify them. I tried to look at what the Department of Justice does, and it just seems to be a totally different position, right? As opposed to all the other lawyers in the office and the work that they do that's not, with, yeah. We're taking care of the judges, like they've got security, they've got things because of what they deal with, right? And prosecutors, I think, are dealing with a lot of the same things. We're dealing with people who are sometimes, serious organized crime or other things that they might need protection. And so, I don't know, but just those factors, I think that there is a good case, I hope, for a description of prosecutors and your staffing pattern that could differentiate and hope to recruit and retain more if necessary. But if 18 is enough, then I guess we just have to discuss that, Mr. Chair. Okay, my last question is, I know I've taken some time, but
Speaker, we will fully support that, by the way. I just want to be clear. And at the risk of saying something good for someone we normally on the opposite sides, it's not unique to anyone who's dealing criminal law. So we've recruited attorneys from public defender,
yes,
attorneys from alternate public defender who want to do civil work. So you're just seeing it across the board, that criminal, and that's not unique to Guam, across the country,
right,
it's very hard to maintain. So we would support any efforts that would help recruit anyone who's involved in criminal
right. That's what
law.
I expect, that the public defenders would ask for the same.
Like I said, at the risk of asking, I'm benefiting Steve.
It's similar, right? Of course, prosecutors are doing a different job. I think a very hard job. And anyways, one more question is, so you talked about the collections amounts that you've brought in, and the bulk of that is from a bankruptcy case for, I think, the Verona Hotel, right? But how many claims has your office filed for tax collections in FY22, and are you expecting to file any in FY23 outside of bankruptcy? The bankruptcy courts, they bring those to your attention, but what about outside of bankruptcy, just with your work with the revenue and tax? Are you expecting to file any claims? Are there any?
So the way, Verona is a very good example. That actually started as a traditional collection case, a BPT injunction that was filed. I believe we received a judgment, and then that was how we got into the bankruptcy proceeding. So we can get the exact numbers. Our office, we weren't filing very much in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic, but we will get you the numbers, Speaker, but I know it's a pretty big number for GMH as an example. Normally smaller claims that we're filing on behalf of GMH. Rev and tax typically will involve BPT, and we can verify the referrals.
I'm curious about the tax collections.
Okay.
Like the big ones.
We can get.
Are we expecting any?
I think there's one involving Santa Fe. I don't know the.
Is that a bankruptcy as well?
That's a bankruptcy.
Yeah,
yes.
Outside of bankruptcy.
I can find out for you.
Yeah, claims prior to bankruptcy. That's what I'm asking about. And then if you could just explain, so GMH, you've been working with GMH, and they were always very, praising the efforts of the Attorney General to collect for them. But they've hired an attorney now. Is that for collections, or are you going to be continuing to do their collections?
We'll talk to the administrator. I think we still, that money goes back to the hospital, and we want to support them. And usually, when our office just initiates contact, it sounds as though they enter into agreements to pay, which then extends the time to pay back. We are kind of an office of last resort. Well, GMH will exhaust through its collection agency and internal measures. And only when they don't believe they've made any progress at all will they refer to our office. So I mean, we'll speak to the administrator, but again, we would continue to offer that service to GMH if they want us to assist.
All right. So you can give me a list of claims that have been filed outside of bankruptcy for FY22?
Specific for rev and tax.
Yes. And you expect that in FY23? Like, are they working on cases to send to you?
It's a little bit, again, I know that they're just very sensitive with the economic times to not bring the hammer and get injunctions on people from running businesses because they're not paying their BPT, but we can have that discussion with
the interesting thing is when you look at the bankruptcies, they're large amounts, right? So they look like they've been lingering for a while, and that's why I'm curious about that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
To see how long, yeah, if DRT is actively pursuing those. Would you say you've addressed all of DRT's requests?
For the collection referrals, when they refer, we're very responsive.
Okay. So it's up to us to check DRT, whether they're making those referrals.
The referrals or not. Again, I think DRT has the same approach where we are an office of last resort, and it's only when, I don't want to say it's like a bad actor, where someone who's not paying BPT and continue to operate, that they would refer the matter to us. It's not going to be someone who owes BPT but is out of business. They're going to be a little bit reluctant to forward that to our office, I would suspect.
All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Attorney General Camacho, I just advise that if you talk about revenue and tax, just be reminded of the Federal Disclosure Act. You can talk about as many cases you want. When you start revealing names, you know that's out of your zone.
I've only mentioned ones that have been filed in bankruptcy court, so that's all public record.
I just
Mr.
wanted
Chair.
to make sure
Thank
so
you.
that when you want to submit a report,
Yes, sir.
number of cases, no issue. Names, zero.
Yes, sir.
Okay, only because it still applies to me today. I still got 2 more years of federal disclosure. I can't talk about stuff. So that being said, Senator Ada, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleague there, Madam Speaker, had asked a couple of questions that I had. So, Attorney General, perhaps this question I would like to ask, only because it falls under your purview, is the Chief Medical Examiner. Where are we at? And the status of that individual.
Well, I will start by saying they have they are their own office, and I am the chair.
Right.
But in that capacity, I can just repeat that the applicant who had accepted the position had to withdraw for personal reasons. We are back into the recruiting phase. I know that we had talked offline about the idea of having kind of an assistant medical examiner position that can perform non-forensic, because what we're ending up doing is handling all the operations. Staffing has been a problem because they can't hire classified employees. They don't have an appointing authority. So I believe that they had an employee who came on as an unclass, ended up accepting a classified position at another agency.
Right.
So if that's something that the legislature would consider to just help provide, I want to say some permanent leadership there, and then they could be budgeted so that we could maintain the forensic pathologists out of Hawaii that could continue to come. I also will use this to, Friday we have a hearing on a bill that would allow for the medical examiner to charge fees, and that would again assist offset potential increase in budget that they would need. The last thing, the competitive salaries for a chief medical examiner, well, the 2 things that we've asked for, one is to be able to offer while they're still in medical school and have not received the certification. We've had interest from people who are in medical school, but we can't rate them as qualified and offer because they don't have the certification yet, and that really hinders our recruitment efforts. Sorry, and then the other thing, so the comparable salary now would be about $225,000 is the base salary for someone with a forensic pathology degree. I think it's like $450,000 is what the CME normally receives as their entire budget. So they really, if we're going to hire someone at that position, we're going to need to increase their funding, because Dr. Espinola was a bargain, I would say, under his salary at the chief medical examiner office while we had him.
Yeah, and it becomes a concern because the backlog that the Chief Medical Examiner's Office has an effect on everyone, the entire community. You know, unless I won't even go there, never mind. Unless we amend the law to allow for a pathologist versus a forensic pathologist, so that we can have some type of leadership in the medical examiner's office, so that we can continue processing cases as they move forward. And then do what you guys normally do. Is when you need a forensic pathologist, you guys get it out of Hawaii, or I'm not sure where else you have a contract with, but something needs to be done. I think 3 years in the making, or now we're going perhaps on 4 years, since Dr. Espanola had announced his retirement and then retired, that we still find ourselves in this predicament. And we don't want to wait until a day where it's going to be someone of significance to pass away from an unknown circumstance or whatever it may be, and then we're going to jump through hoops and wires to try and get that individual's family taken care of so that they can have a burial, while everybody else has been waiting in a bay to get a medical examiner. So, I hope that, and I know your office, just by default, you're the head of the group that
commission,
oversees it, it falls on you. And I agree with you. I mean, we need to do something to increase perhaps the budget of the Office of Chief Medical Examiner to find an individual that is capable of doing it. And the staff that has been there, every time we ask them a question or what, we have to wait for the AG's office. So that's why I defer to you on the questions of what's going on there. And if there's something that we can do to work together to amend the law to allow the pathologists versus forensic pathologists, let's work on that so that we can not be waiting for Dr. Dotterman to come in from off island every other week, every 2 weeks. I mean, the effects it's just unbelievable how backlogged everything is. And it becomes like that because we have to wait weeks to bury a loved one whenever they need to be seen by the medical examiner. And that's just not for burials, that's also for ship outs, that's also for sea burials. So it has that effect, And if we can work together on doing that, that'd be great, and see how we can, if we just, create the position of a pathologist, and then the forensic pathologist will handle the forensic part. If your office can be looking at that research or whatever they can do to, perhaps copy another office that, until we can get a forensic pathologist on board. But thank you for all you guys do at the Office of Attorney General. Introduced many bills that have dealt with consumer protection, and you guys have always be putting out the messages out there about consumer protection. Thank you for that. And then child support, you guys have always been working hard on that, and everything else. So I have no questions. The Speaker had asked several questions that I had for you, and I just thank you for coming forward with your budget proposal, and we look forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Attorney General, and to your staff as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I apologize. I'd like to recognize that we're joined by other colleagues, Senator Jim Wellens, Senator Tello Taiga, and Senator Brown. Senator Chris Duenas, do you have any questions for the panel, sir?
Jesus Mase, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our AG and the team from the AG's office for being here today. As my colleague had mentioned, our oversight chair has always got a very good grasp and detailed questions. I just have a couple of follow-ups, I think. So it looks like the variance on the request is a little over $3 million. That's about right.
I believe the new request has it closer to about 2 million, Senator.
Okay, so I wanted to kind of just drill down a little bit because I followed through on the PowerPoint. On increments, it says 479,000 and some. Are those increments because we were behind on increments? That seems like a really large. That's your annual increment requirement?
Yes, Senator, that's my understanding. We have 200 staff at the office.
Okay. And then the other variance law enforcement incentive pay, and that's basically retention. That's what currently came out in terms of those adjustments?
Yes, Senator, that's correct.
Okay. And so I was following along with the speaker. So the 5 vacancies that you mentioned, those are budgeted vacancies, correct?
Yes,
Because of,
for the attorney vacancies.
So under your vacancies on the request, the 3, that is in addition to that, those would be new positions, unfunded vacancies at this point?
So the way that, if you look at our proposed staffing pattern for prosecution, we have 1 through 16 are filled positions,
Right.
and then the 3 vacancies. So these would all be funded. Yes, is that the question, sir?
So that's not included in the variance. The variance is other, in terms of your request overall.
This is included in our, as part of our vacancies that are, so the 1.3 million in vacancies that we're showing would include these vacancies.
Okay. You know, I'm really interested, because I think when it comes to prosecution, I think the overall feeling within the community is, you know, the effort, if you will, being put forward by the attorneys and how you're staffed up to be able to carry out that mandate as the concern of public safety within the community right now. I think you've really given us an excellent idea, and I'm going to follow through on that with regard to the child support division. I think that it's definitely something that, of course, 4,000 cases, that is quite a lot. And I think that the resources, what you've put before us in terms of efficacy in other jurisdictions, whereby allowing for a opportunity for not having to take up the resources of the prosecution division on that, but having the same efficacy in terms of filing actions and having those you know, things taken care of, I think might be something we really have to look at. It just seems like your resources would be much, I don't want to be misunderstood here in terms of what it means to go after individuals who don't pay their responsibilities. But you've seemed to have presented to us that works equally effectively. Can you expand on that a little bit in other jurisdictions?
So, and our deputy, but I think in Hawaii, and this is where we kind of work hand in glove potentially with the Department of Administration, they are tied directly into financial systems, so they can get income information directly from other governmental entities. And then they use that to prepare, our child support laws have a worksheet, you run their formula. They provide that worksheet to the parties to see whether or not they're going to dispute it, and if there aren't, the equivalent of our deputy AG Perez, he just signs the child support order and it goes into effect. There's no need for, if there's an appeal at that point, I believe they have certain rights, and that's when the attorneys get involved if it goes to the next level. But everything else is just handled internally within the office. They get the information, they prepare a worksheet, they contact the parties, and then they go from there.
Could I?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sir, could you kind of explain, do you think with the current system that we have, we would have access to those records and be able to follow through with that, at least on the government side of the house?
My name is Andrew Perez. I'm the Deputy AG for the Child Support Enforcement Division. But there are some systems that we have access to currently. So we have some access to revenue tax through the DMV to ascertain contact information or location information. We generally do not have access to DOA in terms of income information that way, whereas other states do. They're very integrated. I feel that, or I know that other states have integration with their, let's say, a public health institution, right? They have access to all that information so that they can, one, it's a locate tool, but two, it's also an indication of what kind of support that the family is already receiving, right? So we don't have it, but I am supportive of making those relationships happen with the other agencies so that we can start discussing and determining how to integrate and share that information.
I thank you for that, because I want to work with our oversight chair. Perhaps the time is right now to have a roundtable, bring in the mandated partners on this issue, because it looks like this process might also actually hasten, the timeline for those who have, complaints about needing their, and requiring and enforcing those deadbeat individuals, as I'll discuss it, because that can fall on both sides of the spectrum, I think. But just that even seems like it's a more efficient process, and the only secondary effect of that would be somebody who would be disputing it. But aside from that, it seems like it takes some of the bureaucracy while creating the efficiency, and then building up the office to be able to concentrate more on the prosecution division, on other maybe more high-profile cases. So I'm glad that this discussion today about your budget brought that up in terms of the manpower requirements. Certainly want to be clear on the record here that I'm not trying to dilute that process. As a matter of fact, I think what you've suggested would enhance and maybe even hasten, and maybe in a more expeditious manner bring relief to those who need that support to provide for their children. So I just wanted to close. There was one more question. I noticed on your hiring, once again, so this kind of ties in on your data systems management. Do you currently have any contractual agreements, or have you explored that in terms of that kind of arrangement for your office, in terms of, other than hiring, for that discipline, doing that contractually?
Sorry, Senator. Stephanie Mendiola, General Counsel. I oversee the IT section. So just so I understand your question, are you asking if we've considered procuring data systems management services through a contract? So
yeah, it looks like you're hiring for a manager in that division, right? Is that correct? Is that what I'm seeing?
Yes, correct. So the answer to your question is yes, but not specifically related to that position. So for our systems management, it's been one of AG Camacho's initiatives to leverage technology to improve efficiencies across the office. And there's been a lot of talk about prosecution, and that's actually one of our biggest changes that is part of our procurement this year, is that we're replacing our case management system. We've also replaced the case management system in our litigation division. We are moving to cloud-based technology, and all of those systems will be procured through contracts for services. It'll be sort of software as a service, if you're familiar with SaaS. So it's the prosecution case management system, which is actually going to improve efficiencies all across our office. There seems to be a lot of talk about that this morning, but some of the things that go on, if I could just share, is in addition to, for example, attorneys doing data entry after court, it's also however many attorneys we have, whether it's 12 or 16, managing their own, for example, spreadsheet of their data, instead of having the case management system where all of them access the same amounts of the same data set through whatever different stages they're at in the case, whatever different place they're at, whether they're at court or in the office. And we also intend to use this case management system between our prosecution division, our restitution teams, our parole teams, our victim service team, and our victim notification unit. And I forgot if I mentioned restitution. So those are the efficiencies that we're going to build on. The data systems manager position is going to supplement those efforts in terms of figuring out how we're going to navigate the data policies that we have to put in place as we move from what is called on-premise systems. So we have all of our data in-house in our server rooms, And we have data policies governing that also have to be built up because we're not completely rid of that yet. And then we need to transition into cloud-based managed data. So that's the idea for that position. So yes and no to answer your question as to whether or not we are looking at contracts, addressing the issue through contracts for services.
No, that's good to hear, and that does make sense. I mean, you have to have an overall head in charge of it. It's just nice to know that that's being built out under contractual services, which makes a lot of sense, and especially since we're talking about the possibility of venturing into some policy changes. It'll be important to ensure that you have the proper connections, that the systems throughout the government are compatible, that they're speaking to one another, so that in order to pull that off, you'd be able to avail of the necessary and requisite data to be able to execute that. So, yeah, Mr. Pierce.
Can I just make a clarification? When I was talking about our integration with public health, we do have access to like public services information that people receive. I think where we're hitting a kind of like a disconnect is the referral system. In most states, the referral system for child support, because it's mandated that people or parties that avail themselves of some services have to assign their rights to child support to the government, and that causes an automatic referral to our office. The disconnect is there's no automation for that. So it's a lag time. It's very slow. It's very cumbersome. They deliver paper applications or referrals to our office. Most states, it's electronic. So what we want to do is build that capacity to have that happen, you know, where public health can give us kind of an automated referral system. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Sounds like two-phased. It's a systems issue in terms of integration, and then it's also a policy decision, which I think would make for an excellent roundtable in terms of bringing all the parties to the table to, you know, to really effectuate something that seems like it could build in a great amount of efficiency. And I think if the word got out there, I think the average person that knows you're on their tail, you know. I'm just thinking that you guys have done amazing work to try to get, you know, those resources to those who, especially in these times, right? I mean, it's difficult for everybody, and every dollar matters to particularly mostly mothers, I'm sure, that have to provide for their children. And it just seems wrong that you know, that if there's an ability to build in efficiency to that, it seems like that would be the right thing to do. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I look forward to moving forward, and I'm sure our oversight chair would be interested in doing something like this. So, Sidus Masi for your presentation, and we'll see how this works out when we hit the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. Senator Tuttle, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And good afternoon to my colleagues. I apologize for being late, but I was listening on my way here, and what popped in my mind was something about a shortfall. I mean, that's always concerning whenever they say there's a shortfall. So maybe it was listening, my radio wasn't as clear, but are you telling me this year you have a shortfall for FY22?
No, sir. The last year when we had our budget hearing, what we represented was that if we did not receive about $16 million in an appropriation, we would need to rely on an authorization to have our carryover from FY21. So the that's exactly what the legislature did. Thank you. You appropriated $14.8 million,
Right.
and then gave us carryover authorization. So we anticipate using all of our $14.8 million that was appropriated,
Yeah.
and then relying on our prior year carryover to fund the remaining balance.
FY21?
Actually, we had went back to FY20. We had
Going back to
FY20.
FY20.
That's correct.
You know, there's a lot of things, Mr. Chair, you know, that I wish I'd asked questions about. And one of them was not just the carryover for FY21, but we're finding out that, you know, agencies are also carrying over FY20 to cover some costs. I mean, some of these books are not even closed. And what's even worse is that we don't even know what money you use that carryover for. Was it salaries? Was it for administrative, for supplies, or anything like that? So in FY20, you received a carryover, and that a carryover was amounted to
Well, I
in
get-
FY20.
just to thread through a couple, at that point, and this is tied to the MOU funding, so we were getting into situations where we were receiving MOU funds in the last quarter of a fiscal year. As an example, if we were getting Guam EPA, DPW funds in the last quarter, we would have $300,000 in MOU funds come in, and at that point, we can't procure anything. So that was one of the bases for our request for carryover in FY21, was that we were anticipating $500,000 to come in outstanding invoices, but because of the timing of procurement, all of that money would have lapsed back. So that's when we requested the carryover. This year, we have
Wait, go back to the lapse back. So when this money did not, you were anticipating this 500,000,
Yes.
and then this was we're talking about FY20 or 21?
We were talking about at the end of FY20 going into our budget request for FY21.
Or 21, right? You were anticipating 500,000,
Yes.
but because, and then when you received it, it had to be reappropriated to you? Is that what you're saying?
If we received it, we wouldn't have been able to spend it.
So you needed an appropriation for that 500,000?
No, we were just, when we have our budget for the year, there are certain projects we're going to prioritize salaries and benefits.
Make sure you talk into the mic, okay?
So
Sorry.
we prioritize, I mean, we can't not pay our salaries and benefits. So if we're anticipating federal funds for certain employees or MOU funding for certain employees, if we don't get that MOU funding until the last quarter, that means other projects that we had funded for that fiscal year, we can't proceed with. So since then, we have made the adjustment and are now putting those MOU funds into our operations account. But that was not happening in FY20 and FY21.
Oh, I see. So you're just changing the account where it's going to go.
That's so that if we get on September 28th, $140,000 from Guam EPA, that's going to go into an operations account that we can use to basically to
Right.
fund the same attorney to front the money for the following year.
Okay, so what you're saying right now then is for FY22, your shortfall is not really a shortfall because you're using FY21. What was the amount in FY21 that you were allowed to lapse over?
We were allowed to carry over. So I think we have about $600,000 remaining in our
600,
FY21.
yeah. Okay, so
and
this-
about $80,000 remaining in our FY20 at this point.
And FY20?
That's correct.
Okay.
So we've used FY20. If you look at the breakdown in our FY22 authorized,
So you can honestly say you closed the books now for FY20?
we anticipate FY20 will be completely closed out. That's correct.
Okay, and then FY21, have the books been closed for that yet?
We have two, I guess, larger procurements that those funds are going to be used to pay for. The other thing that's come up recently, our victim automated notification system. It's funded federally through the end of this year, but we haven't identified a funding source for the remainder of the fiscal year. So there's a potential that we would use our FY21 to pay for that services through the end of the next fiscal year.
I'm sorry, can you tell me again how much the lapse was for FY21 that you're carrying over in 22?
FY21, well, we don't know. Right now, we have about 680,000.
Right.
But we have approximately $300,000 plus in active procurement right now.
Active procurement
That's
right now?
correct.
Okay. Okay.
And then we have one other contract so there's a potential of 450,000 of that amount is going to be paid through our current procurement and an existing contract for our victim notification system.
Was it stated how much additional revenue you needed to cover for the pay increases for the public safety section?
That's just included in the total amount of our request.
No, I'm talking for FY22, not 23.
Oh, yes. The law enforcement pay,
Right.
the impact is $268,965.
And you're able to cover that
Yes, Senator.
without any additional appropriation? You found it within your own agency?
So what we ended up doing is we were anticipating hiring investigators. We
Okay.
had 2 investigators that were on extended military leave and another investigator who recently retired. So we basically, that was offset. It was prorated. I believe those went into
I see.
effect January,
Okay.
February of this year.
Okay, I see what you did. Also, are attorneys paid on salary, and if they, do they receive any additional funding, like for overtime or anything like that, or they just paid a flat rate of
Their
their
salary,
salary, right?
That's correct.
So there's no overtime or anything like that, right? I know
I
Steph is
believe-
smiling.
No, Senator,
like,
but if
I
you want
wish.
to authorize that, please do.
There's no objection.
Okay, just-
My understanding, Senator, is that they're identified as exempt employees, so they don't have to clock in and clock out, but they're
Right.
salaried, so there's no overtime.
But as the Attorney General, I'm pretty sure you keep tabs on, if their work has been completed, especially if they're getting paid, and, if you could see if they're slacking off or anything like that. It's kind of hard when you don't clock in and out, but, that's your job, right, Attorney Camacho, to make sure that they're giving us, the people of Guam who are paying their salaries 100% at least. I can't ask for 110, but I can ask for 100%.
I can tell you that we get, in particular, prosecution, they're in court, so that one's a lot easier. Our solicitor and litigation divisions, if there are questions, we receive follow-ups from our agencies, so we do keep pretty close tabs on that.
Okay, we talked a little bit about prior year obligations. Is there anything else that we really need to know about, any kind of prior year obligation?
No.
Nothing at all? Okay. In your cover letter that you provided us for your budget request, comments was used on the FY29 lapses of child support division case management. So how much of the lapses of the Office of Attorney General realized at the end of 2021 that were used regarding the child support division? So let me explain this a little bit better. The Attorney General's cover letter for the agency's FY 2023 budget request comments on the issue, on the use of FY 2019 lapses for child support division cases management system, right? So how much in lapses did the Office of Attorney General realize at the end of FY 21, and what were these funds used for?
Well, I guess, I'm not sure if I understand the question, but I'll do my best. So when FY20, we put in a request, we estimated at that point that it would cost $10 million to migrate our APOSI system off of natural language to a new database. The legislature couldn't front the general funds that we would need to start that procurement, but said that they would allow for us to carry over our FY19, and we would use that for phase 1 of our procurement for the migration. That RFP was awarded, and the good thing is that we ended up saving about $5 million. So we are able now to do the complete project for $5 million. That requires a complete dedication of our FY19 carryover, so we did exactly what we committed to the legislature. All of those funds are going to be used to fund phase 1, or actually to fund the migration. And the balance would be found, the Child Support Enforcement Division will find, I think there's another 400 or 500,000 that they're going to use from the prior year dedicated child support funds to pay the balance of that migration.
Okay, thank you. Damaged government property, how do you recover from the attorney, like for instance, guardrails and things like that, and people have damaged? How does the Attorney General, go after these, like insurance companies? If it's a car that damaged the property of Government of Guam, who's going to pay for that repair? Does the Attorney General get involved, and do you seek, remedy from these insurance companies?
That's a project that our Consumer Protection Division actually worked out with DPW. I don't know off the top of my head whether or not they've implemented or instituted any recent collections for that. I would say that that's also typically if it's a criminal charge that's filed, that would be included as part of restitution.
So really, you're not, you don't...
I don't know off the top of my head, Senator. I'll have to ask our consumer chief to see if they filed anything on behalf of DPW.
Yeah, I'm asking you, Attorney General, if you can please look into this, because if you see some of these railings, on the side of the road, they're very dangerous. Nobody is, I mean, something has been sitting there for months and it's still, mangled from a last car, and, this could really be very dangerous, a safety issue. So as soon as we can, collect whatever funds to repair that damage from the person responsible, the sooner the better. And another question when it comes to customer service, how fast do you respond if somebody were to call the Attorney General's office to ask for a meeting with regards to anything from, a customer service issue or want to report a crime? How long, I mean, what's the wait time for these individuals to get to see you or someone in your office?
Well, to report a crime, we would refer them to the Guam Police Department, because that's who would investigate. It really depends on the division. So our Child Support Enforcement Division, as an example, they receive over 100 calls a day.
Oh, wow.
So we have 3 or 4 customer service representatives, but assuming every one of those calls is going to take 5 or 10 minutes, there is going to be an extended wait. One of the things that we have done through our IT system is every division actually has now a direct line. So if you need to get a hold of our Consumer Protection Division, you don't need to call the general hotline. You can actually call directly into Consumer Protection, solicitor litigation. Every division has their own number. One of the upgrades we're excited about for our new phone system is it allows for a chat feature on the web.
Yeah.
So we recognize that you may not be able to call in, but if we're able to move some of our customer service representatives for certain periods of time to be able to do a website chat interface, that's something that we're looking at. So it really depends, Senator, on the division you're calling. Consumer protection, I would venture to say they're going to be very quick in answering the phone. Child support may be a little bit longer just based on the volume that they receive.
Well, I bring that up because of all the agencies, I greatly appreciate the work that you put into making it, user-friendly for those going to your website and looking at it. So I kudos to you, whoever has been doing that, and I appreciate all the, the upgrades that you're making to it, or the upgrade in information that's provided to the public. So it's very helpful and useful. It'll alleviate some of the calls coming to your office in the first place, if you make it a user-friendly website and people can just navigate through it. So it's very helpful, and I greatly appreciate that. I think it was mentioned earlier while I was driving, one last question, Mr. Chair, is the undistributed child support payments and how much checks remain. Did you bring, is that in your report here?
We didn't do it in the analysis, and we created a team. We broke it into categories. So the first step was looking at the actual checks and reissuing them. I think we had a case in like 2000 that we cut that was cashed. Then pandemic hit, and I'm just going to be candid that it shifted. EIP took a lot of resources, all the stimulus payments. Basically, they shifted the resources to address that. So we haven't made as much we've made progress in UDC, but it's been on hold because of a lot of the impact for EIP and other stimulus payments.
How many checks have been unclaimed for the last, and what's the time frame? Is it 5 years before you consider it no longer?
That's, and we're gonna, when you talk about escheatment, it becomes an issue because any amount that escheats to the state is automatically offset in our match. So if we were to escheat $1 million on the 66% that the federal government matches, they would give us, we would get $1 million less. So any escheatment we would need to make up back through an appropriation in the general fund. The checks themselves, I believe most of them, a lot of them have been handled. It's really the ones where there aren't records that have been the bigger problem, and we just have money in an account and no paper trail. And that's the bulk, I believe, of that 5 million UDC. So we did an RFP for a forensic accounting firm. We did not receive any interested bidders. This is back in 2019. And then there was the fire at DeWitt, which we were not the only agency that was impacted as well for a lot of our records.
Does the Office of Public Accountability do your audits?
They have audited our office. On the CSED side, we haven't had anything, but the IRS I think every year comes out and they do an audit of our Child Support Enforcement Division. Every 18 months, IRS does an audit.
Okay, I'll check. Usually, no, there wasn't any audit yet at this point. Okay, other than that, I thank you so much, but I would be leaving you much happier if I had a response from my January 19th letter that I sent to the Office of Attorney General for the issue on the port. Speaking of audit, that's what just reminded me. And I sent that to you, and I know, Attorney General, you have a conflict of interest, and that it's going to be turned over to Shannon Taitano. And I did a request for that since January. We're almost into the 7 months since I've requested for that information. So Shannon, I greatly appreciate it if I could get a response within the next, few days, because it has been almost 7 months since I sent my letter asking for your opinion. Okay, greatly appreciate it. And thank you again to all those at the office. Mr. Perez, good to see you as always. And of course, my good friend sitting there. I see you smiling, but with your behind your mask, but thank you so much for all your hard work at the Attorney General's office. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Tardigree. Senator Moylan, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Attorney General, for you and your team's presentation and trying to stress to us the importance of getting your budget plus a little bit more to do your job correctly. The committee chair and myself were both prior law enforcement agents, Guam Police Department and in the parole office. And your top 3 things that you talked about that you spend most of your time on are, let me see if I got this right, DUI, family violence, and possession of illegal drugs. Stress to me again the importance or the amount of time this takes your agency to take care of, please.
Well, okay. I'm going to do your law enforcement background. The good and the bad thing, so right now, possession of a pipe with residue is a felony offense. And we understand the importance of methamphetamine and addressing the drug problem we have. But for a simple possession case, we're required to present every one of them to the grand jury. So whether it's someone who has a pipe with residue or someone who's caught with 2 pounds, procedurally, even if you qualify for adult drug court, those are resources. We have to have an attorney staff, and we have to have the court bring in a grand jury to hear an officer say, I patted this person down, they had a pipe. Is there a probable cause to proceed? So I think it would be good to talk to the judiciary to see if they would be interested in another way to deal with simple possession, because there is so much in terms of resources that are spent when the statute allows for adult drug court. And if you complete it, you get your case dismissed and expunged. And again, you have to be eligible for it, but you're talking about first offenders, first time you're being caught with the pipe. So that's one thing that's intensive, not only in the volume of cases, but also just the grand jury presentation. DWI and family violence, those typically are misdemeanor offenses, so we don't have the issue with grand jury, but just the volume of cases that we prosecute. I wasn't saying that those are priority, but those are, in terms of volume, take up the vast majority of the cases that our office files. If you look at the courts and our CCR, those are consistently in the top 5 cases and types of offenses charged out.
I think that's what the legislature needs to assist you with, to update these laws, to better work with you folks so you can address things, right? If it's too much time, what we need to do as the legislature to correct that, to better utilize your time. So hopefully, before this term is over, we can possibly do something or maybe get it into the next term. But those are good things to look at, because I think for our committee chair here and myself, what we're used to seeing is we wish there was more treatment and rehabilitation, but what we mostly see is what you're talking about. What the public sees is like they get bailed, right? They're released back into the public, like that recent one with the offense that happened in the Dededo skate park, right? And then the offender is back on the street, and the victim is seeing the offender at the malls and so forth, right? But you're just following the law. Right? If we made the adjustment to make it correct, and you had the more, you have better opportunity to put the hammer down, right? I think the one term committee chair and myself see too much of is when we go through these rap sheets, right? And we're dealing with the same people while we're in and public safety, it just gets really frustrating, and so does the public as well. And the recidivism is just incredible. They just go in and out, from their family, from their father to their grandfather, right? It seems to be over and over again. I'd just like to see some amendments with your assistance there on some policy changes to really give the opportunity to take people off the streets, to rehabilitate them safely, and to allow the public to feel safer while they're getting their treatment. And of course, that's the main goal, right? As committee chair myself has seen these, most people in prison are not going to stay there for life, right? Like 90% of them are going to be released. And so how do we make that safer for them to be released? So I appreciate your honesty to say this is what you got to do, legislature. You got to update the law so we can help you help us, right? With that, what I want to address also on your third paragraph on your presentation here, of course you talk about the opioid epidemic, but you also mentioned the meth situation on Guam. And I've heard from many folks that if you buy meth on Guam, it's like the cheapest anywhere. As the Attorney General, is that what you're seeing as well? Is that what the price is on the street? If you can better explain that to us, please.
It has to do with production and where it's being produced. And most of our meth is, and I want to, before I proceed, just really commend Chief Ignacio and Director Pareto and their efforts. I mean, you're seeing, it's unfortunate it's making a headline, pounds of meth being seized, but that's the Postal Service, customs officers that are doing their due diligence, and we're still seeing very low prices. But most of it's coming from California, Nevada, the West Coast, and our understanding is some of it's coming from Mexico. So basically, Mexico, they have these factories, they bring them across, Postal Service is then shipping it to the island. So I think we have to have a dual-pronged approach. One is intercepting them before they are introduced to the community, and the other is going to be providing rehabilitation and addressing addiction. I did thank the legislature because I want to say 14 million we're going to receive, and when we went with Guam Behavioral, when you talk to Salvation Army, New Beginnings, when you talk to Oasis, like that money can really make an impact. Small things that we can do to help people, wraparound services. So we've heard about people who complete a program in-house inpatient treatment, but then don't have any services to assist with housing afterwards. And when you look at the cost of living, you look at rent, how do you expect someone who's overcoming addiction to then go out and find a home without having to fall back potentially with the same people that are going to have them make bad choices? So we are thankful and we're hopeful that this advisory council is going to make sure that money's spent to really address and tackle that side of the house. And then we're going to be working with our law enforcement partners on the interdiction side and arrests.
I appreciate that, and I think what I like to see is more focus on stopping it from coming into our borders, right? There are those with those struggles now, but the future is the kids, right? So that's what we really want to try to protect. There's a Guam Customs Authority, right? We had to extend their property lease with the Port Authority so we can build their sterile facility in order for them to have the proper area so they can screen these containers coming in, whether it be for invasive species, use taxes, but a lot dealing with drugs as well. So we're hoping the administration can assist us at least funding that architectural and engineering design of that building before we lose that property once again. But I know you're also working with HIDA, is that right? The high intensity drug area.
Yes.
Right? Can you tell us how that is going, right? There was an attempt at one time prior, and now we're back again, but are we in that situation where the federal government can recognize, and is the is the Attorney General looking at that as the importance for federal funds to stop these, to help prevent us getting more drugs into the island while we're trying to rehabilitate those that have the habit?
We were not successful in our petition. So the first time Guam submitted a HIDA petition on its own, we went back and we talked to our law enforcement partners, and we believed the path forward for us was to join with the CNMI to have a regional approach and to become part of Hawaii HIDA. So that was submitted at the end of 2020, 2021. I don't even know what year it is anymore, but it wasn't accepted. We just resubmitted our petition. We beefed it up and really focused on trying to accurately portray we don't just have a drug problem. This is connected regionally and nationally. And once we find out, we'll be sure to let the legislature know. But we're really hoping. The big thing, though, is going to be just on information sharing, because the federal government gets so much more intelligence, and our local partners could really benefit from getting access to that and formalizing a little bit more of those partnerships. Well, thank you, Senator, for your support.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope we can really assist you in further getting the support that you need, because it's so important. I believe in the rehabilitation, but I really think right now the public is looking for that safety by removing this from the streets, while we rehabilitate and stopping it from coming into our borders. So I thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your panel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Mullins. Senator Brown, do you have any questions for the panel?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Certainly thank you to the Attorney General and your staff for being here today to respond to our questions on your budget. I did appreciate the fact you did include funding for drug testing. That's certainly an area of concern we have. Obviously, you're more aware of that probably than we are in our community with the growing drug problem that we have. With regards to testing, have you had any testing at the AG's office? I don't know if your employees would be considered designated positions.
I believe our attorneys are designated positions. We haven't had a basis to test anyone who's employed. We do have all of our employees, there's pre-employment requirement that they get drug tested, but I don't think that we've had anyone that we've tested after, like random tests after that for a designated.
Well, I was aware it's a previous administration, but there's an executive order that require regular testing of designated positions. And I am finding, as we ask these questions of different department and agencies, that most department and agencies are not doing any type of annual or regular testing of designated positions. I understand for those that are not designated, you have to have a cause or a reason, of course, to request that a drug testing be implemented. But for designated positions, I believe there is.
I'm sure all of our attorneys are going to, because
Yeah,
I think anyone who's an
to
assistant
check and
AG
research. I just think it's important, and granted, the legislature hasn't done testing, but I'm available anytime our leadership determines we should do it. We're in a very public position. Certainly, if we tested positive, I'm sure it'd be in the front page of the paper. But I just think with what is going on in our community, I just think it's important we set the standard in our own leadership and within department and agencies, because it is a very real problem that is permeating throughout our community. And it's not just those that are on the drugs, buying the drugs and selling the drugs, it's the impact to the rest of the community. The other crimes, obviously, that you're seeing through your office, that's all an extension of the growing drug problem that we have on Guam, including just our own personal safety. I mean, I don't feel safer today than I did years ago. I think that a lot of people in the community, certainly those that we talk to, a lot of our elderly people, especially those that are living alone, it's just that they don't feel that sense of security. And it's not getting better. And that's bothersome. It's concerning to our people. I did want to ask with regards to your maybe you can just elaborate further on your classification of your employees. I say, of course, the bulk of your employees are classified, but could you elaborate? It's going up to 26 for this fiscal year, unclassified positions. Who falls into that besides yourself?
So we would have all of our victim advocates
Okay.
would be unclassified employees. Our deputies are also identified as unclassified because you hold an unclassified position, and then the classified is in addition to that.
Okay, so are you as Attorney General, are you able to appoint your deputies to those positions?
That's correct.
Okay.
So then they would still hold their classified, and then the unclassified employment would show there. I can get into, I believe I get a secretary and a special assistant by statute
Okay.
or by law. But those are the ones off the top of my head. It's just the deputies, advocates.
Okay, I just appreciate clarification with regards to that. One of the things I'm looking at in legislation is...
I'm sorry,
go ahead,
and
is
it'll
there
also be
anything
federally funded employees.
Okay,
grant
obviously
funded.
federally funded. And then I assume that if there's no longer federal funding, then it's not like a classified employee in terms of being able to come up with additional local funding to pay for their position. One of the things I'm looking at with the Office of Public Accountability, I know Senator Tello elaborated on some of that, is trying to strengthen the ability of the Public Auditor's Office, not just to provide reports, because they do that fairly consistent and fairly regularly, but it's like it never gets to the next step. If there are issues beyond, and I understand procedurally, it might be things in department and agencies that need to be improved. They're not criminal in nature, but they're just simply, these are the guidelines, you know, these are requirements, you just need to go back and implement them and properly follow them. But if there's findings that are a little more serious than that, I don't get a general sense in the government of Guam that really much of anything happens with those issues. And I don't know if it's because of the workload, and granted, you have a lot of critical issues on your table that you need to do, and you have a finite amount of resources to do it. But in my 30-plus years of experience in the government, there's always a certain element, I don't know why, but it exists in our government. And there are people, because they get, over time, you know, they get to institutionalize themselves, they create their own kingdoms, and, you know, they wheel and deal. They will and deal within their respective official capacities, and they just do what they do, no matter who the leadership is in a department or agency, which over time, as it should, changes. But, you know, they're able to do that. And I don't sense any fear. You know, I'm not going to be worried the Attorney General's going to come knocking on my door if I'm, you know, abusing the system. And so I wanted to ask that, because one of the things that I've discussed with the public auditor in the proposed legislation is allowing and providing that office the funding, not just to hire their own attorney, because they could do that, but then they're sort of isolated within their own operation there. But as we've done in the past, and as you've done with other Government of Guam agencies, is to fund an assistant attorney general that can be assigned to the public auditor's office. Also allow the public auditor to have investigators, so that if he determines, or she, or whoever holds that office, that they need to do further investigation, or something of concern that needs to be addressed, that would be a direct link to you working hand in hand with your office if they determine there's something more that needs to be investigated. Because, you know, white-collar crime, I mean, of course, it's not the same as somebody going to a convenience store and holding, you know, the business up for $50. Of course, we expect them to be convicted and thrown in jail. But you have people that are abusing in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in this government, and not much of anything happens with it. And that's a concern I have. I think we should have a certain degree of fear. We should be a little worried about you knocking on our door, and I don't feel it. And I don't know if this is a way and a mechanism that we can strengthen that process, so that beyond the audit reports that we spend a lot of time and effort generating, and then it goes back on the shelf, then another year we do another audit, I just think there is a need to have that sense of fear, because our government, and in my experience, is getting more and more and more and more isolated from the public it's supposed to serve. We're expendable. Those of us that are elected to office can always, if we decide to run and the public just says, I'm not happy with your performance, I'm not re-electing you, as they should, that's their power. But the rest of the government, we have isolated so much that it's most unresponsive sometimes. And there's not much, it doesn't matter who you elect to office, or what their position or their policy, or who the next governor is going to be. There's just not sometimes that level of concern and responsiveness from the rest of the government structure, because the body itself has no direct connection to the public it's supposed to serve. And we protected it. The whole idea here is to protect the government of Guam. We only exist for the government of Guam. Some people have that view, and that's how they live their policy, and that's where we give the raises and everything else, because we got to protect Gov Guam, because Gov Guam is, you know, that's our political base. That's who's going to vote for us. Everybody else, who cares? And I just don't think that's how our government should run. I think there should be an expectation that all public employees should be accountable. And if they're doing something wrong and they're abusing the authority that they have, then they should be held accountable. So I wanted to get your feedback with regards to that proposal. Is that something that you see could be workable with your office?
Well, I will say that we've had, we've created a formal partnership with the OPA. I think we filed one of the first cases that in a while for the violation of open government involving raises that were done in executive session. And that was largely out of a result of working with the OPA and getting that referral. Their office has also referred a few other things to us involving retroactive pay or potential retroactive pay. We've issued opinions. Unfortunately, in that situation, I believe the right decision was made to not do a retroactive pay, so we weren't required to take that next step and to take action. Where I think it gets, I don't want to say confusing, but something violates the law and the immediate response is someone has to go to jail. And as you know, again, being in government, a violation of procurement law has its own set of remedies that are available. A violation of the ethics code has its own remedies that are available. And I think as we get more robust in the ethics commission and them doing some of that work and being very public about it, we have taken a very strong approach to government officials who commit crimes, and it may not be something that's capturing the attention, but the direction has been, we're not going to suspend a sentence unless you justify it to the chief prosecutor. So we've had instances of government employees who've committed crimes and have gone to jail for significant periods of time, longer than they would have, but for the fact if they had been private citizens.
Right.
So we're very careful and not, bringing down the public, but we have, as an office, taken an approach. That is the approach I can tell you right now, is that when we charge a government official, expect that we're going to ask that you, even if we're arguing 0 to 30, but we're not going to agree any longer to just suspended sentences, because we had the opposite problem before. Oh, you just stole from the government, there's no victim. And no, that's the people of Guam were the victim. So we have other cases that are ongoing, but that is the direction that our prosecution division has been given, that in cases involving public officials, if they abuse their authority, we're not going to suspend a sentence unless it's very clear that it doesn't warrant in that case. In terms of an assistant AG being appointed to the OPA, I think we have to tease it out a bit, because we appear oftentimes before the OPA in procurement appeals. So we would need to have to find a way to isolate that attorney, whether to create a separate division and have them housed there so we avoid any conflicts with the remainder of our office. But we definitely would be open to it. We enjoy our partnership with the OPA. I think we're all excited to have their audits, and there's an outcome where we're filing a lawsuit, we're threatening to file a lawsuit, and we want to be working partners with the OPA because we share the same mission, which is to make sure everyone's following the rules.
Well, I certainly hope when the public hearing is scheduled on that particular bill, I'd certainly appreciate the input of your office on how we could properly address it, and providing, if we're able to provide the additional funding so that it's there, so that you can work that out. But I think there's very much a need for that. I mean, I appreciate certainly the work that's been done, but there is a need for check and balance. And right now, I don't sense that. I don't sense that fear in the government. And I think the abuse can be, as simple as taking the official nowadays and driving it all over town and joyriding, which of course administratively could be dealt with. But if there's flagrant abuse of the official capacity, that I'm concerned about, because that has been allowed to go for so many years. It's just, what are you going to do about it? If you're going to expect the government to come and get me,
luckily, I have very law-abiding citizens, and our chief deputy drives the official when I ride, and she drives 35 miles per hour, and sometimes I can just speed it up a little bit. So we're rule followers in our agency for the most part.
I mean, I don't know if we should put tracking devices in vehicles. I've done that in a couple of agencies just because of that. I mean, and nowadays with the cost of gas, you got to wonder. But I certainly look forward to your input with regards to that. If there's a way we certainly can find to, as you mentioned, properly isolate that Assistant Attorney General so there's no conflict with your office. And be able to give that assistance to the public auditor, so we're not just, having the report and it goes back on the shelf, that we can, properly address. I would love it if it's simply corrective action that needs to be implemented. Department or agency implements that. If they're not following procedures and there's no ill intent, they just need to get their house in order, then fine. But if there's, intent there to abuse capacity, because if people know there's consequence, and it's been my experience, if they know there's consequence, most good law-abiding citizens will do the right thing. But if there's no consequence, and they'll get around to it. I mean, unfortunately, when people are devious, they go out of their way to do it, and nobody's going to come knocking on their doors. So I think we just need to have that check and balance. I mean, we're over $1 billion in operating this government. It's an awful lot of money. It's probably going to grow at the rate we're looking at, requests for budget increases. And I just think at the end of the day, our people need to have some comfort that their government's responsible, and all their officials, us, all the way up and down the ladder, are performing responsibly. If we're not, then by all means, we shouldn't be sitting in our respective seats. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much for your response. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Brown. Madam Speaker, Oversight, you have
Thank you.
2 more
Yes,
questions,
couple-
and then we're going to wrap it up.
Yes, so when you look at the staffing patterns for the different divisions, so the Deputy Attorney General, there are the attorneys, and then there are Deputy Attorney Generals for every division, and each of those seems to be getting another line, like an extra pay, but they're all seeming to be different. Am I reading that correct? Why is that?
So it depends on what their base classified position is. So if you are an attorney 4-1 and you are appointed Deputy Attorney General position, you are set in the CWA in your salary as a 5-5. I'm just going to give that as an example. But the difference between your classified position and the CWA 5-5 is going to vary depending on the classified position. So every attorney who's the 5-5 receives the same salary, but that line is going to be different depending on the classified salary. So that's just the difference.
Are all the deputy attorney generals making the same total?
No.
Because they started off at different levels?
It depends on certain things. You know, as an example, we've adopted a rule that if your classified position, you would make more as a classified attorney, we will make sure that the deputy position matches it. So we've had some attorneys who would be earning more if they were to just not be a deputy. So that's where we move them up. So like, I think we have an assistant deputy attorney general who they're classified as like a 412, and the equivalent on the deputy side is like 510, 511. So that's why they would receive that salary, versus someone like our newer deputies would be at a 5.2, 5.3. So duration within the office is reflected, and the agency responsibilities are also reflected in the deputy AG pay.
So that's an exact formula or classification that's followed, not like a discretionary amount?
It is discretionary, but that just is a matter of practice. We look at all, I mean, most of the deputies are around the same, but again, some divisions.
No, they're very different. One's getting some $20,000 on top of the regular salary.
Well, that's
one's getting $5,000.
The $20,000 would be the difference between their classified and the unclassed position. So they're not actually receiving $20,000 more. They're receiving the same salary potentially, but they're classified as just that's the big gap. That's the bigger gap.
Do you use above-step recruitment?
We have, yes.
For which divisions? How many, for lawyers I'm talking about, and
Yes.
how often have you used it, and for what divisions?
We've done for civil litigation, I believe twice, and that's off the top of my head what I can recall.
That's the above step?
Yes.
Yeah. Can we use that for prosecutors?
We could.
But
So the issue that we have is that when we have a younger attorney, as an example, they wouldn't qualify. So if someone...
Yeah, so what justifications have you used?
It would be...
To recruit or the special skills?
Usually it would be special skills.
Because of their experience?
That's correct.
So, Attorney Paris, is the Deputy AG, are all of the child support lawyers and employees unclassified because they're federally funded partially?
They're classified.
They're all classified, even...
With the exception of one attorney who is
the
a retired attorney who has chosen to come back.
Okay, so if it's partially locally funded, then they're classified?
Correct.
Okay, and then so the licensing boards, you said you allocated lawyers for all of the agencies, right? And so recently the medical licensing board's attorney went off island or went on leave, and they were not provided one. They were told there's none available at the AG's office, so they had to have their meetings without any legal. And then they've also been told, and so I'm just trying to find out, is that an issue for all the other agencies, that if one AG's out, that they just don't get counsel? And then the other issue that they're facing is these hearings officers, they're being told they have to pay again the AG's office for hearings officers, as opposed to the AG's office providing hearings officers for administrative hearings.
I'd have to so with respect to the requests for board representation, I suspect the question would be we don't normally provide attorneys to just sit in a hearing that's not going to have any legal issues that are raised.
Wait, no, board meetings.
A board meeting. So if there are meeting and there's no legal questions that they're anticipating, we typically won't require an attorney to go, because if there's no legal questions, there's no need for an attorney to be attending the meeting.
Well, that hasn't been the practice for all the licensing boards. The attorney's been there
And
for every meeting.
That's why they really enjoy working with Attorney
So
Weinberg. 'Cause I
you're,
believe he-
you're changing that. And what about the hearings officers then?
That-
It seems to be, when I read the statute, it says that the Attorney General's office shall provide the hearings officers for these administrative adjudication hearings.
And again, I think that the issue that we've had in the past is depending on the type of hearing you're having. We cannot both provide within the same division counsel to the board and then have their coworker also be the hearing officer in the same matter
Why not?
because of a potential conflict
I
within
mean,
the
can't
office.
you screen, I mean, it's only your office that can be the hearings officers. I mean, so that would be like a defective statute if you're saying that we can't provide hearings officers throughout the government.
We've SAGed attorneys. We provided some temporary attorney general status so they can perform hearing office. They can function as a hearing officer. But that's been the problem that we're having is that and I understand you're like, well, you can figure out a way to conflict. I can tell you that there's been intra-office conflicts because you have the person arguing against their next door, literally their office mate, and then they have to deal with each other at the office of the water cooler. Why did you rule against me? And it's easy to conceptualize a conflict, but the function of our office, how small we are, it has created tension in the past.
So you're saying that you're not going to provide hearings officers unless they pay? Every agency of the government has to pay for hearings officers now?
I can verify with that, but I know that we've been using the retired attorneys in many instances, like Guam EPA is an example, where we had an retired attorney. We avoid the conflict issue because they're not housed within the office. And I don't know if they paid us, if EPA, that might have been federal funds, they may have paid us for it, but.
Because these boards, their cases were delayed for so long, and then they had to go out and, procure hearings officers, which I don't understand why, if the statute is so very crystal clear that it's the Attorney General's office that's going to provide hearings officers. If there's a problem with the Attorney General's office providing hearings officers, we should fix it, because, I mean, what do the other agencies do? I would think you're providing hearings officers for them?
I know that there have been recent procurements for the prosecutors to hire someone to prosecute in an
Yes,
administrative
that's
hearing.
different.
Right.
They've also had to hire attorneys, so they had a board attorney. They have to hire a lawyer for prosecution. They have to hire an investigator because they said that their attorney can't do any of these roles. And then they have to hire, now they're being told they have to hire hearings officers. But that's the statute says this all comes from, the hearings officers come from the AG. Do you provide hearings officers to workers' comp?
Yes, that is, wait.
And do
We
you
did,
charge them? That's what I'm talking about. You don't charge them, that's because that's what the statute says. You're going to provide it. And so I'm wondering why.
Is it so
the
which board?
licensing boards, the medical health licensing boards.
Okay, we'll look into
Thank you.
I thought that had to do with the prosecution, but I'll try to verify.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Right.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Nothing but DCC.
The committee will conclude the budget hearing on the Office of the Attorney General's office. Committee will continue to receive testimony. Please address your written testimony to the Committee on General Government Operation, Appropriation, Housing, and submit it via email to Senator Joe S. San Agustin at gmail.com or to my office located at Rand Care Building, second floor, Suite 3, 761 Marine Corps Drive, Tumuning, Guam. Sizuz Masi for your attendance and participating in today's hearing. And for those at home, thank you for watching. This budget hearing on Bill 276-36 UR relative to the Office of the Attorney General's office is duly heard and is now adjourned. The time now is 4:17. Please be safe and take care.